I'm Kaz. Welcome to Sew Focus on Tour. Today I'm going to show you how to replace the zipper in a Riff Raff toy. So my granddaughter's Riff Raff toy, the zipper broke. So I've unpicked it all and I've taken the old zipper out, and now I'm going to reconstruct it. Now the only way to do this is to actually stitch it by hand. So I've found some thread to match and I'll get started. Alright, so we're just going to get started, and we've got the little flap section that sits over the zip. So what I'm going to do is actually position that on top of the zip, just making sure I've got it up high enough, and so that it matches with the edge of the zipper. So I'll pop a couple of pins in to hold that in place, and I'll just pull the zipper tab out of the way. Alright, so this section here we can actually stitch on the machine. So I'm just going to pop over to the machine and stitch that down, and then I'll be right back. Alright, so I've stitched that on using the sewing machine, and I've just stitched along the edge, and I had blue thread on the machine, so I've just used that because it's going to get covered up and we aren't going to see it. Alright, so now we can place that into the head section, and we're going to put right sides together. So this is the right side and this is the right side here. So we're going to place that so we've got right sides together. And we'll pin that in place. Okay, so the little flap should match up with the top and the bottom of the opening, and now we're going to stitch that by hand. Now I'll just pop my glasses on so I can see. And I'm going to use double thread, so we'll just pop the ends together and tie that into a knot. I'll just make sure that's nice and secure, because with the velour it's a little bit more open and the knot can come through quite easily. Alright, so I'm going to stitch this from the right side. I'll just do a couple of little stitches at the top just to secure that in place. And then we're going to do a little stitch in the flap section. And then a little stitch in the fold of the fabric. So we're just going to take a tiny little stitches and pull that up. Alright, so then we'll go back into the flap and then into the fold of the fabric. Right, so we're just going to keep working our way along, going from side to side. And by doing it this way, it's going to be invisible from the outside. Again, a little stitch in the flap. And then a little stitch in the fold. And just make sure you pull your threads up so you don't have any loops hanging out. Alright, little stitch in the flap. And then a stitch in the fold. Right, so you can see that that is actually quite nice and neat, and that's where our opening is. Another little stitch in the fold. So the stitches that I'm doing are only about 2 to 3 millimeters long. So just little tiny stitches to make sure that it's nice and secure. So almost at the end. Alright, so I'm going to take that thread through to the back now, and I'm just going to knot that off. I like to do 2 or 3 stitches, so just take the needle through and then loop the thread around and pull it up through the loop, and then we'll snip that off. Right, so I'm just going to tie my end again. And I'll flip it around the other way. Alright, so we've got our the edges all nicely done. Alright, so now we need to sew the zip on this side. So we need to position it so that the right side of the zip is against the right side of the fabric. And to make sure that it lines up, I'm just going to zip that up to the top. And I poke the zipper into the back neck. So that's where that's going to line up, and we'll just pop a couple of pins in just to hold it in place, and then I'm going to move those pins before I start stitching. Okay, so that's all matching up nicely there. So now I can undo that zipper. And I'm going to now lay my zipper flat and pop the pin in from the inside. Alright, so I'm just transferring those pins now so that they're sitting on the inside of the zipper. Alright, so that's going to give us a nice finish along that edge. So we'll just stitch along that edge now. It's a little bit tricky to start because we need to get right in close to the edge of that zip. So I'm just going to do a couple of stitches at the start just to secure that in. And again, I'm just going to do little tiny stitches all the way along. So I'm doing them about 3 millimeters long. So where I come out, I'm just going back behind that stitch just ever so slightly, about a millimeter past it, and then going back through. So in effect I'm doing a little back stitch on each stitch, so that's just going to make sure that it is extra secure and it's not going to come undone. Alright, so little tiny stitches. Alright, so you can see that's stitching in nice and close there. as you're stitching, just make sure you don't catch the lining or the stuffing. Just make sure you're stitching just the fabric and the zip. I'm just getting a couple of little tangles happening there. And so if you do get a little tangle, just make sure you pull it up and then pull it out. Alright, so you don't want to have loops on there, because loops eventually work their way out and you'll end up with a big hole. Alright, so we're almost at the end. Just doing the last couple of stitches. Okay, and we're already on the wrong side of the fabric, so we can just end that off with a couple of knots. Alright, so we've now got our zipper in. Okay, so that's working nicely, and the little flap is going to cover over the top. Alright, so next what we need to do is join the zipper into the top of the head, and we also need to join the zipper into the neck. So I'll just rethread my needle. Just again tying a nice secure knot on the end so it's not going to pull through on the velour. Right, so we need to tuck that zipper into the gap that's there, and we also need to make sure the flap is sitting down inside as well. So what I might do with that is actually make sure it's all flat, and I'm going to lay that flap over top, and I'm going to put a few stitches in there just to hold that in place. Okay, so just taking my needle in from the back, I'm just going to do a couple of big stitches just over the teeth of the zipper, just to secure that end in. And I'll just do a couple more stitches just on the edge. and I'm going to do a little loop knot there. Right, and then poking my needle back through to the inside. Right, so this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because we want the right side of this fabric up against the right side of that fabric, and we want to stitch them together. So place that over so it's covering over the end of the zipper and the end of the flap, and we'll just pop a pin in there to hold that in place. Alright, and then we're going to have a look on the inside here just to make sure that's all sitting flat, so that's looking good, and I'm just making sure that I haven't caught my lining up, because the lining needs to be stitched down. So I've just poked the zipper down inside so that I can see my lining on the inside. And I'm just going to secure that zip just on the inside with a couple of stitches. And then I'm taking the needle back through to the outside. So now very carefully I'm going to do a little stitch on the head, and then a little stitch in the fold of the blankie section, and just alternating those stitches. So little tiny stitches, like these are little stitches only about 1 to 2 millimeters in size that I'm doing here, because I want to make sure that this is really nice and secure. Alright, so just going from side to side, a little stitch in the blankie, and then a little stitch in the head, a little stitch in the blankie, a little stitch in the head. So you want to make sure this is really nice and secure. Alright, so I've just got a little tiny bit more there to go. Right, so I'm going to poke that needle through to the inside now. I'm going to pull that up tight. And then I'm just going to do a notch on the inside just to make sure that it doesn't pull through and come apart. Alright, so now we need to look at stitching that lining down. Alright, so the lining is going to sit across the bottom of the zip. So I'm just going to pop a pin in to secure that in place. And then the lining's also going to overlap on the back of the zip. I got a couple of stray threads there from when I did my unpicking. Alright, so it's a little bit fiddly, but definitely worth the effort. Alright, so I'm just pinning my lining along the inside of the zip, so that's going to cover up those ugly blue stitches that I did before. And we also need to secure the zipper at the top, so you can see we've got that opening there, so that actually has to fill that opening. So again, we're going to go right sides together, so we want the right side of the head matching up with the right side of the back of the head. So I'm just going to pin one side and stitch one side first, just so that you can see what I'm doing. So we really need to get right in there to make sure that we're getting that seam stitched close. Alright, so again, a couple of stitches to get secured. Alright, so just doing really tiny stitches here to make sure it gets secure. I'm going to pull that pin out the way now. So just making sure I'm still on track, matching up those edges. Alright, so we've got that edge now stitched in, so now we need to stitch the other edge in. Again, we're going to do right sides together, so we want the right side of the front of the head matching up with the right side of the back of the head. Alright, so I need to pull that up nice and firm so that it matches. I'm just going to do a couple of extra stitches in there to make sure it's nice and secure. I'm not going to put a pin in here because the pin's just going to get in the way. So I'm just going to hold that in place. Just little tiny stitches. And the more stitches you put in, the better here, because this area is going to take a fair bit of strain. Yeah, just making sure I'm on track. It should be a little bit easier for you to do, because when you're stitching it, you'll only need to worry about yourself watching the stitches, but I'm trying to make sure that I'm getting it nice and secure and I can see what I'm doing, but I also am trying to make sure that you can see what I'm doing as well. Alright, so that's looking quite good there. So I'm just going to end that off with a couple of knots, and then we can stitch the lining into place. Alright, so now we are just going to attach the lining on the inside. So the lining actually holds all of the stuffing inside the riff-raff head. So just going to pop a couple of pins in to secure that in position, and just folding the edge back over. Alright, so ready to stitch that in now. I've just made sure the zip's open as far as it'll go. Alright, so we're just going to do little tiny stitches again, so just securing that to start with, and then a little stitch in the fold of the lining. And then a stitch into the zipper tape. Another little stitch in the fold of the lining. And try not to get caught up around your pins. And then a stitch into the zipper tape. Alright, so we're just going to continue all the way along the inside edge of the zip, just so that lining is secure and it's covering over the edge of the zip. So again, my stitches are only around about 2 to 3 millimeters long. And if you get a tangle, just pull that tangle out. I think my granddaughter's going to be very happy when I see her tomorrow. My daughter gave me this about 3 weeks ago and asked could I fix it, and I unpicked it and then thought about it and just kept putting it off, but I just had to get it done. Alright, so little stitches. When you're doing tricky little jobs like this, if you take note as you unpick it, then you put it back together exactly the same way that you take it apart and in the same order. So when I started to unpick this, I unpicked the lining first. So the lining is the last thing that gets stitched. Alright, so almost at the top edge of the hedge. I'm just taking that last pin out. Just little tiny stitches. Alright, so now I'm just going to put a knot in the end there just to secure that. And now I'll pin the lining on the other side. And you've got this, the little holes from the stitch line from where it was originally stitched, so you've got that as a guide for where you need to fold the lining to stitch it back down. Right, so far so good. Right, so a couple of stitches just to secure that at the top. And then I'm going to work my way down the other side of the zipper, attaching the linings. So again, just little tiny stitches in the fold of the lining, and then a little stitch into the zipper tape, and just alternate from the fold into the zipper tape. Pop that pin out of the way. Alright, so in the fold of the lining, and then into the zipper tape. So little tiny stitches. So I've just got the last little bit down the side of the zipper here. It's getting really quite tight and fiddly with this section. Alright, so now, oh, not quite there yet, just a few more stitches to go. Alright, so I'm going to now do just a little knot just at the bottom there. But I'm not going to cut my thread off yet because we still need to stitch across the bottom section. So there's another little section here of the lining that will fold in. Alright, so we've got another little section there that needs to fold in and cover over all of those ends. I'm just going to tuck all those ends in. So just tucking those bits in and make sure there's no bits that are going to hang out and get caught in the zipper. So it is quite tight in here. Again, we're just going to do very tiny little stitches. And just catching it in the fold of the lining and then into the zipper tape. Get a little tiny hole in there. When I've unpicked it, I've caught the lining because it's only a nylon lining, so it does tend to get holes very easily. So that's looking a tiny bit messy, but I don't think in the scheme of it it's going to really make much difference, as long as it's all secure and it's not going to fall out. Right, so I'm just doing my knot to secure the end of that, and we are almost there. Snip that off. Alright, so we've got the inside done, and we've got the lining down each side of the zipper. We just need this last little section at the top here to be stitched. I'm just going to pop a pin in to hold that. And I think I'm going to need just a little bit more thread than what's on that needle at the moment, so we'll just rethread the needle. So I'm just going to pop that in and secure that end. just a little loopy hole there. So I'm just going to slide my needle along through the fold. So I've taken that about 1/2 centimetre, and then I'm going to start stitching from there. So again, just little tiny stitches into the lining and into the fold. Oh, it definitely wants to get caught around that pin, so we're going to get rid of it. The stitch was a little bit too big, so I just pulled that back out. The more you can churn this out to get inside, the easier it will be for you. But I am just about done. And that's it, that's the last stitch. So just going to do a couple of knots there, make sure that's secure. And then I'm going to feed that end back through the fold and then snip that off. Alright, so there we go. Our Riff Raff now has a new zip. Now, because of the safety aspect of the Riff Raff toys, the little tab needs to be removed. So we've got the little zipper tab there, so we don't want the kids to be pulling the zipper open and getting to the batteries. So I'm just going to go and get some pliers, and we're going to snip that off with the pliers. Alright, so I'm back with these are actually side cutters, they're not called pliers apparently. So I've got the side cutters, I'm just going to snip them in, and that's cut through quite easily, and I'll snip that on the other side. Whoops, there it goes. It's one way of getting rid of it. And just pull that section out. Might need to snip that bit as well. Oh, I've got bits flying everywhere. Alright, so now that little tab has gone, so it's a little bit harder for the kids to open now, so we need to use a pin or something to pull that up. There we go, and Riff Raff has a new zipper.